The year was 1999. The euro was established. Communist pigs in China cracked down on internet freedom. Bill Clinton was acquitted. George Bush was elected. His opponent fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. And one of the greatest cinematic masterpieces of our lifetimes, The Phantom Menace, was released in theaters. But something else happened that year. Something that many people seem to have forgotten. A small and insignificant film from a tiny studio called Pixar quietly debuted in theaters. On a budget of a mere $90 million, the studio and its distributor Disney somehow managed to make a meager profit, scraping in a measly $497 million at the box office. But we're not here to talk about that movie. Quite honestly, I doubt you've ever even heard of it, as its name has long since been lost to the annals of history. Rather, today, we're here to discuss the movie's tie-in game, known to historians the world over as Toy Story 2: Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue. Now, I would be lying if I said that I started this project as an objective outsider, an arbiter of facts and reason. I would love to say that I started this game in present year without any prior knowledge or established opinions. I wish that I could approach this game with a fresh set of eyes and view it for what it truly is, without any personal biases. Unfortunately, my own peepers will forever be obscured by a thick nostalgic visor that snaps down into place whenever this game appears before me. See, for me, this is more than just a video game. This was actually young Reese's first ever 3D platformer, nigh his first ever 3D game, period. You could say that this was my own Mario 64, but better. See, licensed games based on movies have always had a rocky reputation. Sometimes you'll get a GoldenEye 007 or Lord of the Rings Return of the King, and then sometimes you'll get E.T. for the Atari 2600, yeah. Toy Story 2: Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue, henceforth referred to in this video as TS2BLR, certainly belongs among the former, being a truly fantastic licensed movie tie-in game that, yes, I do believe is better than Mario 64. At least in some regards. You see, even with my own personal biases set aside, there are some aspects of TS2BLR that surpass even the legendary Italian plumber's first 3D outing. We'll be going over those aspects in detail here soon, but first let's go back to the 1990s and set the stage.
Hello!
Released by Nintendo on June 23rd, 1996 in Japan, Mario 64 blazed the trail that 3D platformers would follow for years. This game single-handedly defined what three-dimensional gaming could be, and its influences can be seen throughout gaming history, even in today's modern action-adventure games. I don't think it's a stretch to say that without Mario 64, we would have no Assassin's Creed. No, trust me, the connections are there, though that might be a discussion for another video. Nowhere are Mario 64's influences more noticeable, if not painfully blatant, than in the games that immediately followed its release. Banjo-Kazooie in 1998, Spyro the Dragon in 1998, Gex, Enter the Gecko, also in 1998, my gosh, 1998 was just a heck of a year. All of these games were clearly inspired by Mario 64's gameplay, movement, level design, controls, and big lizards. And hey, that's not a bad thing. Mario 64 is not a legendary game because it was the first 3D game. It wasn't. It's legendary because it was the first 3D game to do things right. The worlds featured diverse landscapes that were open and fun to explore, the controls were tight, accurate, easy to understand, and quick to master, and the gameplay was pure, unbridled fun. You would have to be insane not to ape off its success, which is what TS2BLR's developers, Traveler's Tales, opted to do. However, they were not lazy with their gameplay appropriation. No, they actually made several tweaks to the formula that, as far as I am concerned, elevated the game to infinity and beyond its contemporaries. Let's talk about that gameplay. Before we actually discuss the gameplay itself, we must first establish the setting and the story of the game. Yes, these elements are critical to the gameplay. These are things that the developers would have had to sort out before they started working, because these are the things that'll define what the world is, where we are in the world, and what we are doing within the world, things that are essential for gameplay. Now, some movie tie-in games will opt to diverge from the movie in some way, often creating their own story that exists alongside the film story while still being its own story. Star Wars games do this frequently, and to good effect, I might add. Bounty Hunter is a tie-in game for Attack of the Clones, and while it was released in the same year and is heavily inspired by the film's narrative, the developers chose to tell a prequel story instead of following the events of the film. It still ties into the plot of Attack of the Clones, just without mirroring the film's story beat for beat. Similarly, the Star Wars The Clone Wars game was released in 2002, the same year as Attack of the Clones and Bounty Hunter, and even though it starts with the events of the film's third act, it tells them from the perspective of Mace Windu instead of the film's leads Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme. The movie's plot is finished after the first couple of levels, at which point the game proceeds to just branch off and tell an entirely new story that takes place after the events of the film that are completely made up by the developers. It's actually a really good game. But why even do this in the first place? Why do some video game developers opt to tell their own story within their games instead of mirroring the plot of the films that their games are based on? Well, as it happens, it's actually kind of difficult to make a game out of a movie plot. Imagine playing as video game Anakin, sitting in a field full of funky cows, selecting dialogue options that you hope will increase the relationship meter you've been trying to fill with Padme. Now that sounds like an incredible game to me, but probably boring to a lot of other people. So if, as a developer, you decide that you're going to follow the events of Attack of the Clones beat for beat, you're going to either be stuck with boring dialogue-heavy gameplay bits, or those parts of the story will be displayed as long cutscenes, or they'll be cut entirely, potentially to the detriment of the story, or you'll have to spice them up by intercutting them with scenes of Anakin fighting mutant funky cows that are trying to eat Padme during their picnic. None of these are good options. Well, maybe that last one. Similarly, a game that attempts to mirror the events of Toy Story 2 would be a rather boring affair. An action stealth mission where you try to rescue Wheezy as Woody without being noticed by the yard sale shoppers would be fun, I will grant you that. Yeah, but the following level where you have to flip through a bunch of TV channels until you find the Alice Toy Barn commercial might not be. For this reason, the developers at Traveler's Tales wisely opted to focus the game around Buzz Lightyear and company, as they travel the world in search of their missing friend Woody. It does follow the plot of the movie, but it chooses to expand on the unseen elements of Buzz's adventure. In the movie, we see Buzz and his traveling companions leave Andy's house at sunset. We don't see them again until much later that night as they are sneaking around the city. But what happened between those two scenes? Well, they must have made their way through countless backyards, perhaps through a construction site, all the while battling other toys who, like Buzz Lightyear himself once, don't realize their true natures as toys, as playthings. That is the story that the developers chose to tell, and it is from that story that our environments and gameplay are born. For the most part, TS2BLR is an action platformer. As the player, you must face off against a variety of enemies using Buzz's trusted forearm laser and wing spin attacks, all while traversing diverse locales which feature excellent verticality that truly tests your platforming skills, as well as puzzles to complete and hidden Pizza Planet tokens to collect. I know it sounded like I just read that off of a box, but I didn't. I wrote that. I wrote that down myself, and then I read it, and then I listened back to it, and I realized it just sounded like I was reading off the back of the box or something, like the person who made the game. I didn't. I wrote that. I don't know why I delivered it like that. I'm not going to re-record it. That I can't see any way to re-record that and not make it sound like I'm just reading off the back of the box. Speaking of Pizza Planet tokens, they are this game's equivalent to stars in Mario 64. Once you've procured a token in one level, the next level will be unlocked and made available to play instantly. At certain points throughout the game, your progress will be gated by the total number of tokens possessed, meaning if you've been hasty, you might find yourself backtracking to previous levels to procure more tokens. Each level has a total of 5 Pizza Planet tokens to collect, with a variety of methods to unlock them. Some methods are standard across all levels, while some only appear in a single level. For example, Ham is present in every level, and in exchange for 50 coins, he will give you a Pizza Planet token. Now, fortunately, all levels feature more than 50 coins, so you'll never find yourself scouring the darkest, dankest corners of these worlds in a desperate bid to find that final coin you need to 100% the level. No, you'll be doing that to find sheep. Or army men, or luggage. That's our second consistent token. Each level has one person who has misplaced 5 objects, which they are desperate for you to retrieve, and in exchange they'll give you a Pizza Planet token. Usually these objects aren't too hard to locate, even being kind enough to make subtle little noise cues when you venture close to them. Sometimes you'll only be able to retrieve one after performing a task or completing a puzzle, such as the army man on level 2 that can only be rescued after you destroyed all of his, ant hills? I've been playing this game for 20 years and I'm still not sure what this guy's doing. What is going on here? The third consistent token type is the boss fight. Every level features a unique boss that, unfortunately, is very easy to kill. Mario 64 is not a perfect game. I will admit, though, that the bosses in that game are infinitely better in every regard. I have a lot to say about combat and enemies in this game, though, so we'll come back to that later. The fourth Pizza Planet token type is the time-based Pizza Planet token type. During this Pizza Planet token type, you'll find yourself racing either against another character, against the clock, or even against the token itself on one level. Win the race against RC or collect all of the horseshoes within the time limit and the token is yours. The fifth and the final token type is the incidental/puzzle token. These vary level to level but are usually awarded by either reaching a certain location after a bit of daunting platforming or by completing a puzzle such as mixing paints to achieve a certain color. Now in most cases, all of the tokens can be acquired during your first run through a level. In fact, there are only 3 or 4 instances where that is not the case, and we will discuss that a bit more later. Unlike in some other games with similar collectathon-esque elements, it is unlikely that you'll find collecting these tokens to be boring or tedious. Most things you'll need to collect, like coins or missing objects, will be tracked down during your natural progression through the environment, meaning you'll very rarely find yourself desperately searching for that one final thing you need to 100% the level. And while we're talking about levels, having played quite a bit of Mario 64 here recently after its All-Star re-release on Switch, I do feel confident in saying that the world sizes of each game are very comparable when you take scale into consideration. Remember, you are playing as a toy, so even though the first world is a single house, the environment as a whole feels massive compared to Little Ol' Buzz. But don't go off thinking that these huge environments must be a nightmare to traverse, because they are not. By placing the camera behind Buzz at a set distance, programming in a phenomenal auto camera, and including massive landmarks in every world, the developers managed to create gameplay environments that feel massive without being confusing for the player to navigate and explore. It's very unlikely that you'll ever feel lost in the game, and the level design is made in such a way that it naturally guides you from one space to the next, collecting objects and completing tasks along the way. It is downright masterful. Continuing with our level discussion, there are 15 levels in total, which can be divided into 5 sets of 3. Each set features 2 standard platforming worlds, with a third boss fight arena level capping it off, for a total of 10 unique, distinctive open-world platforming sandboxes. That might not sound like a lot, but this game focuses on the quality of environments and activities over quantity, and it pays off. Each environment feels unique compared to the others, even levels that take place in the same general space, such as Owl's Toy Barn and Owl's Spaceland. These are clearly in the same building and share several assets, but the atmosphere of each level is so drastically different that they remain distinct from one another. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that each level features extreme verticality, allowing you to reach mammoth heights for such a small toy. This adds to the grandiose feel of the game and really helps drive home the idea that you are just a tiny toy in a great big world. Still, my favorite level is the first, Andy's house. And not because it is objectively the best, but because it's the one I spent the most time in. See, I was a dumb kid, and when I first got this game, I'd never played a 3D platformer or any 3D game beforehand, so every environment in the game was new to me. I got stuck in this crib and restarted the game just to get stuck in this crib again. I did that several dozen times, over the course of several weeks. This was the first 5 minutes of the game, people. I don't know how many times I relived it. If I hadn't been so slow when it came to reading, I was actually 11 before the gears in my head finally started to turn on that one, I wouldn't have had as many issues. The game has several Mario question block style blocks that you can bonk with your head to get a quick explanation of basic mechanics the first time they are introduced. These are optional, so you don't have to interact with them, which is great for people who want to play the game again, but not get bogged down by tutorials for mechanics they already know. Similarly, if you aren't sure where to go or what to do next on any given level, you can track down Rex the dinosaur. He's usually located near the start of each world, and he can give you general tips on what to do next, like mentioning that Ham is in the living room and he needs 50 coins, or that there's a spooky robot in the attic guarding something. Like the information blocks, which also happen to have his face on them, this information is optional, and can only be accessed if you choose to access it. If you want to hard mode this game, you can hard mode this game. Ham and Rex aren't the only characters you'll find consistently throughout your playthrough. In addition to finding Pizza Planet tokens, several levels will have you searching for Mr. Potato Head's missing body parts. In exchange for their procurement, he'll reward you with a power-up that can help you along your journey, such as the Cosmic Shield for traversing dangerous environments, rocket boots for traveling at ludicrous speeds, a disc launcher for dealing damage to tougher enemies who aren't affected by your laser and spin attacks, grappling hooks for ascending air conditioning ducts and emergency fire escapes, and hover boots that grant you the power of flight for an annoyingly limited amount of time. Once you've unlocked these upgrades, they'll remain unlocked on every level they appear in. You won't have to perform favors for old Potato Head every time you need to use them, just the first time. Sadly, these are not permanent upgrades for Buzz. Instead, after unlocking them, you'll find them strategically placed in specific areas around certain levels, and their uses are limited either by time or amount. For example, the Cosmic Shield, Rocket Boots, and Hover Boots only remain active for a few seconds. After the effects wear off, you'll need to go back to their spawn points and recollect them if you want to continue using them. This means that their area of effect is limited to the space immediately surrounding their spawn points. Want to rocket up and down alleys and gullies main thoroughway? Too bad. That's not the specific purpose the developers had in mind for that power-up on that level, so it is out of the question. Similarly, you can only hold a limited amount of discs and grappling hooks at a time. If you run out, you'll have to track down another spawn point and collect more. And they don't carry over with you level to level, so if you want to use them somewhere the developers didn't intend, perhaps to make a boss fight that you'd previously skipped a tad easier, too bad. Speaking of boss fights, I guess it's time we talk about those.
There's a copter robot over here. I repeat, we got a copter robot. Jumpers. I repeat, we got jumpers. Zergars. Run, there's Zergars.
Throughout the course of your gameplay, you as the player will face off against a variety of foes. Most you'll just shoot with your laser into death, some will require the old wingspin attack, and some, well, I don't know, that's about it. That's all there is to it. That's the entirety of combat in this game, at least against basic enemies. Some require more hits than others, some have certain immunities you'll need to overcome, but none of them are particularly creative in their design or execution. Imagine, if you will, a Mario game, but every enemy is either a Goomba, a tougher Goomba, a Goomba with guns, or a flying Goomba that sometimes also has guns. To be fair, there are several unique enemy designs, including snakes and racism. I'm not joking, there were protests, it's wild. But they are all dispatched in the same way. As the game goes on, the enemies will become harder to kill, but not in a way that requires skill. Rather, you'll just need to shoot them a bunch more, which is annoying. It would be nice if there was a way to permanently upgrade Buzz's attack specs, but no such upgrades exist. Most, if not all, levels in the game feature a green laser upgrade that Buzz can collect at any time, no favors to Potato Head necessary, and that does make dispatching the more powerful enemies a bit faster. But once the green laser has been depleted, it's back to your bog standard red laser. You can hold down your laser attack to deliver a more powerful blow, but there's no easy way to aim this attack unless you use the visor lock-on, which can be tricky if you are in the middle of being attacked. All of these shortcomings carry over into the boss fights as well. Every boss fight in TS2BLR basically boils down to shoot, run, turn around, and repeat. Usually there are some obstacles or projectile attacks to avoid whilst repeating this cycle, but they are never particularly challenging. Hey, sometimes it's even worse than that, and you'll just find yourself standing perfectly still, taking hits whilst you perform spin attacks to eventually kill the boss. You might die doing this, but death has no real consequence in this game, and we'll discuss that later. In addition to each world having its own boss, every third level is a dedicated boss fight. By which I mean you are deposited into a small box of a world with one enemy that you kill by shooting and or spinning against it. These fights are usually slightly more difficult than standard boss fights, but only slightly. The environments tend to be extremely bare bones as well, making these fights frustratingly forgettable affairs. Giant Spaceship is the only memorable boss fight in the game. It's a giant spaceship with 6 yellow pods attached that release smaller enemies whenever you attack the spaceship proper. You must dispatch these smaller foes before you can continue your assault on the giant spaceship, which makes for a very challenging and genuinely fun fight. While I can't say this is a fantastic boss fight, I will say that it is the best of the bunch. And if they were all on this level, it would certainly elevate the game quite a bit. But combat is only a small part of the total package. What about the platforming? The controls on the PC and PlayStation versions of the game, which are the only two systems I've ever played the game on, are very well executed. Buzz handles excellently, in a way that really forces you to take responsibility for your errors. Whenever I failed to jump on my most recent playthrough, I knew it was because I had failed, not the game. Okay, well actually the button I used for jump on my Razor Orb Weaver is broken and sometimes registers as a double jump, which led to a lot of frustration for me while capturing this footage, but that's not the game's fault, that's Razor's fault, screw you, Razor! There is a bit of clunkiness in one regard, that being grabbing hold of ledges. Buzz needs to be lined up perfectly parallel with whatever ledge you want him to grab hold of. Otherwise, when he jumps up to it, he'll simply ignore the ledge and fall back down. Annoying, but at no point was it detrimental to my playthrough. The camera, oh, the camera is superb, divine. Mario 64 sits alone at night, drinking budget whiskey, looking out the window at the moon, longing to have a camera as good as TS2BLR. The automatic camera in this game manages to point exactly where you'd want it to at all times. When exploring the world, it stays right behind you like a well-trained dog, following your every movement, responding with expert timing to every action. Want to take control? You can, and you can actually control it. Ever played Mario 64, or heck, even Mario Galaxy, and found yourself trying to move the camera, only to have the game tell you, no, you can't move the camera that direction right now? Well, you won't experience that with this game. Sure, you can't adjust the perspective up or down, in or out, but left and right movements always work all of the time, without exception, and if you really need to look up or down, you can go into that visor mode. You'll have a horrifying Buzz Lightyear reflection staring at you every time you do that, but well, nightmares are only nightmares, right? They can't actually kill you, I hope. Throughout this entire game, there were only 2 instances where I felt like the automatic camera might not work perfectly for everyone. One is in boss fights. During boss fights, the camera locks onto the enemy and keeps the player's focus on them at all times. In some games, I've found this behavior to be very annoying, if not detrimental to playstyle, but for me personally, in this game, I didn't have any issues with it. The other issue is when climbing pipes. If you rotate Buzz whilst climbing, the camera won't follow Buzz until you've come to a complete stop. This behavior caused me to jump off in the wrong direction a couple of times, but it can be easily overcome by either waiting patiently for the camera to swing around after you've stopped moving, or by rotating the camera around manually, which is always an option that always works, unlike in Mario 64, which is a dumb game for chumps. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking to yourself,
Oh, wait just a minute, this gentleman Race or whatever his name is, he said this game was vastly superior to Mario 64 in every way. Yet all he's done so far is point out how flawed the combat and bosses are. And the only positive note he's managed to muster in this game's favour is that the camera isn't atrocious like Mario 64's.
well, first off, stop doing that voice, you weirdo. Who you think you're fooling? I know that's not your native accent. Secondly, I never said it was vastly superior, unless I did, in which case you can put the timestamp in the comments. And thirdly, good point. Let's finally discuss the one element that knocks this game out of the park. In Mario 64, each level has several stars to collect. However, upon collecting a single star, the game will boot you out of the level, forcing you to re-enter and restart the level from the beginning to procure the next star. This pads out the playtime substantially and is quite honestly just very annoying and unnecessary. Alright, now I'm sure we've all heard people say that this had to be done to make the game run on N64 hardware, but that just isn't true. Banjo-Kazooie doesn't make you leave after collecting a Jiggy, which I can only assume are similar to stars. I've never actually played Banjo-Kazooie. Furthermore, this game doesn't boot you out after collecting a Pizza Planet token, and it was released on the N64 the same as Mario 64. Now, is that enough to make it objectively better? Well, no, of course not, but wait, there is more. Dying in Mario 64 resets you back to the start of the world, and losing all of your lives boots you out of the game entirely, all the way back to Peach's Castle. That's dumb and annoying. Meanwhile, in TS2BLR, death is meaningless. So long as you have an extra life, you'll just pop back into existence literally exactly where you are standing and resume whatever task you were in the middle of, including boss battles. Okay, yeah. Now that I think about it, that isn't really better, is it? Attaining the punishment out of death in a game like this leads to lazy players standing in front of enemies, taking hits, and not even trying to play strategically. Now, sure, if you lose all of your lives, you'll be booted back to the level select screen, but this game is very generous with its lives, so unless you're just really, really bad, it's unlikely you'll run out. In reality, lives in games like Mario 64 and TS2BLR are an ancient holdover from a bygone era that should have been forgotten about long before either of these games were released. They make sense in a linear NES game where the goal is to reach the end in one go without saving, but in a game with big open worlds, exploration, collectible saves, lives just seem like unnecessary annoyances more than anything else. I think a balance between how Mario 64 and TS2BLR handles lives would be ideal. Death should be punishing, but it shouldn't lead to you being booted back out to the home screen. I think both of these games would have benefited from a system where death takes you back to the start of the level, with all of your collectibles and achievements intact. If you must have lives, then sure, losing all of your lives can boot you back to the level select, but not all the way back to the main menu or outside of Peach's Castle. That's just ridiculous and unnecessary. Sure, it pads out the runtime, which is why I expect Nintendo did it in the first place, but if I die, I'd rather be able to get right back into the action. Not in the way that TS2BLR does it, obviously. But being reset to the start of a boss fight or the beginning of a level seems like the best compromise between punishing poor tactics and maintaining a fun flow of gameplay. And I guess with that, we come to our conclusion, which is actually a pretty surprising one that I wasn't expecting when I started to write this script. When I decided that I wanted to make this video, I had a clear goal in mind. I was going to convince everyone who watched this video that I was right, and that this childhood favorite of mine was vastly superior to Mario 64 in every conceivable way. But then I sat down and played through the entirety of Toy Story 2 Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue, going so far as to 100% it in a single sitting. Afterward, I began writing down my thoughts on the design and functionality of the game, and I slowly began to realize that my planned premise was entirely wrong. Sure, subjectively, personally, I still prefer this to Mario 64, but on an objective level, I have to admit that Mario 64 is superior in several ways. Even with its legacy aside, it's just a better crafted experience overall. I know we didn't touch on the music and the graphics, and that's just because I didn't have much to say on either. The music is, at best, good, and most of the time just suitable. You've been listening to it for most of this video. I pulled the soundtrack for this, so I guess you can make your own mind up about it. Some of the tracks are bangers, some of them I would definitely skip on shuffle, and the graphics are decent. I played the patched PC version, which by the way runs flawlessly on my PC at 1080-60, and that is proper widescreen you've been looking at, just by the way. It isn't running stretched out. I think with these settings, the game still looks good today for a game from that era. The only issue I had was that when playing at 60 FPS, it is literally impossible to beat Zorg in the elevator. You have to leave the game, load up the NVIDIA control panel or whatever graphics card you use, and force the system to run at 30 FPS just to finish the fight, and then leave the game again and revert the settings. Annoying? Yes, but not undoable. But really, it just can't compete with Mario, especially in the music department. I've barely put more than a couple dozen hours into Mario 64 over the years, and even so, I know that game's soundtrack when I hear it. Dire Dire Docks moves my soul in a way that no N64 game has any right to. Now, none of this is to say that Toy Story 2 Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue is by any stretch a bad game. Far from it. I think it still holds a few advantages over Mario 64, such as the vastly superior camera and the way it handles the Pizza Planet tokens compared to Mario Stars. That said, at the end of the day, there isn't really any competition. Toy Story 2 Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue should go down in history as one of the greatest licensed movie tie-in games of all time. Heck, it deserves to be recognized alongside platforming greats like Spyro and Banjo-Kazooie. However, no matter how impenetrable my nostalgic visor may be, TS2BLR will never be able to topple the Italian plumber from his well-earned seat at the head of the platforming table. And you know what? That's okay. It's okay to like things that you can acknowledge are not objectively the best. I love the Star Wars prequels. I can acknowledge that they are objectively bad films, that they are inferior to the original trilogy, but I still love them. I grew up with them, and I think there's a lot of merit to them that certain people choose to ignore. Unlike the Star Wars sequels that people say they like even though there's no merit to them, and they're just objectively bad films. Toy Story 2 Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue may not be a perfect game. It may not be the best game ever, but it's still a good game, and I still love it. And if you've never played it and you can find it, I recommend giving it a chance. It's a good time. And after all, that's why we play video games, right? To have a good time. And I hope you had a good time watching this video. Thank you folks for watching. God bless each and every one of you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!